Hey hipsters, it's Blake, best mustache in the game, coming at you again for another episode of Tuesday Brewsday. Looks like we're on episode 3 already. Very exciting. This series is rolling by, man. Time flies. But today we're going to build around another new commander from Dominaria United. And if you're not familiar with the Brewsday series, if you're new here, first of all, thanks for stopping by. Second of all, Brewsday is a series that I'm starting to do where every Tuesday I come up with a new brew for you of an untested deck, a new idea that I have, something for you to try out. Some weeks are a little bit more ambitious than others. This one's not going to be the most ambitious week. I think this deck is going to play out as a pretty reliable, good deck as it stands. That doesn't need a whole lot of testing. All that being said, like I said, this is an untested deck series. These are just brews that I come up with baseline strategies around things that are either A, not getting built, or B, not getting built enough, not a lot of representation. So I think it's worth, taking a second look at it, maybe for you to consider building around yourself and maybe using this as a shell or building this exact deck. I don't know. But yeah, so that's what Brewsday is. Today, we're going to get into it. We got Vodalian Desecrator. We're going to go with that. It's a blue and a black for a 1/2 Phyrexian Merfolk Wizard. You tap to draw a card, then discard a card. If you discard an instant or sorcery this way, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. You can pay 2 and sack this to cast an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. If that spell would be put into a graveyard, exile it, activate this ability only as a sorcery. Okay, so there's a couple sort of directions here that I kind of like with this card. If you watched my complete commander set review of Dominaria United, where I reviewed every single one of the 75, that's right, 75 commanders, that video took a while, of all of Dominaria United. That video is out if you want to check that out. But Vohar is one that kind of stood out to me and struck me as an interesting build around. Because initially when you read this, it seems like it wants to be like a sort of spell sluggery sort of deck where you pitch cards and then cast them later and stuff. But to me, it seems like that the second ability is just kind of like good to use when you run out of things to do, you know what I mean? And generally, I don't really want to be pitching my instants and sorceries to this card. I would rather cast them because the payoff of gaining 1 life and making your opponents lose 1 life is not something that you can get going a ton, you know what I mean? Unless you have like a ton of untapped synergies, but then you're just kind of really relying on this 1/2 to stay on the battlefield. So all of that part of the card seemed clunky, but what did stand out to me is just having a Merfolk Looter in the command zone. As Merfolk Looter is a very powerful card that just does this. It's a 2-mana 1/1 that taps to draw a card, and then you discard a card. Having that effect in the command zone is really nice. And then I noticed that this card's also black. So one thing that you usually want to do with looters is throw away big things, big creatures to reanimate. And I noticed that the second ability on this card also allows you to play instants and sorceries again from your graveyard, aka reanimation spells. So what I really like with this card, and the direction I'm going to kind of go to today, is just a blue-black Reanimator sort of shell, with Vohar being a very important piece in the engine, as it helps you dig through your deck to find reanimating spells or big creatures to reanimate, and then it gives you a way to put them in your bin to reanimate by discarding them. And even if you run out of things to do, or you want to cast a Reanimator spell again that you've already cast, then this gives you an outlet to do that as well. Albeit an expensive one, as you'll have to pay 2 mana to sack this, and then replay it whenever you want to get it going again. But that being said, once you start getting things reanimated, your game plan is already going to be looking pretty good, where you won't need to rely on this card a ton. But always having access to like a second copy of reanimating spells that you've already cast definitely is very appealing to me. So I really like what this card's doing. I like the shell that this sort of offers. So if you aren't familiar with what the Reanimator strategy is, Reanimator is basically a strategy of putting big, powerful creatures in your graveyard to cheat out into play by using cards like Reanimate. So I'll pull up Reanimate here. So Reanimate's just a card. It's 1 black mana. It's a sorcery. You put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and then you lose life equal to its mana value. So for 1 mana, you can get back any creature from any graveyard. Generally, you'll want to do yours if you're leaning into a reanimating sort of archetype. So that's kind of what reanimating is. It's based around the card Reanimate. And there's a lot of other cards that do this sort of effect. Reanimate is the best, most efficient version of this effect. However, there are plenty of other ways to do that. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get into it here. That's kind of the shell of the deck, because we want to draw and discard cards. We want to draw through our deck to try to get to our reanimating spells and just interaction and stuff like that. And then in the meantime, we're pitching our giant idiots into our graveyard to reanimate for very cheap. And then meanwhile, if we run out of things to do or we want to be able to reanimate something again, then Vohar is also a way to reanimate things, as it allows you to recast the reanimates again. Or if you pitched one earlier because you had to, then you can use this and you didn't just waste the card or anything. And then it randomly can gain you some life here and there if you really need to. But generally, we'll be pitching creatures with this ability. So yeah, that's Vohar. That's kind of the direction I've decided to go with it, as far as like the idea behind the deck and what stands out to me about this card. Hopefully that helps you in terms of maybe how you evaluate cards and look at cards and stuff like that. So that's my dissection of Vohar. Let's get into the deck. I'm going to start off by enabling some tags here. I tagged all the cards in this deck, as there's a couple moving parts in the deck. One is that we have reanimating spells. Two is that we have things that we want to reanimate, right? So first of all, we'll cover the sort of reanimations package that we're running. I stuck with all instants and sorceries, as Vohar allows us to recast them, which is obviously what we want. There are a few enchantments that I considered for the reanimating package, as they're just very efficient ways to reanimate things. However, I like the extra synergy with Vohar, as far as being able to flash them back when we need to with its second ability. So there's probably a world where I should add in the enchantments. Again, we'll get into the sideboard eventually, but there's probably a world where I'm supposed to run those reanimating spells just because they're very efficient. And maybe I don't have quite enough here, but to me it feels like once I get one or two, and a lot of the ones I have bring back more than one creature. Once I get one or two going, it feels like I'm feeling real good, because I can just keep doing them. I can do them again with Vohar and stuff. So, excuse me. That being said, we're starting with 12 here as our number for that reason. So first one is Blood for Bones. It's 3 and a black for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you sacrifice a creature. Then you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then you return another creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So notably, none of this targets. So you cast this, you sack the creature when you cast it. Your opponents get chances to interact. After they've done their chance to interact, you bring back 2 creatures. One of them can be the creature that you sacrifice, since this doesn't target. So yeah, Blood for Bones, 4 mana to reanimate 2 creatures is very efficient. We have a few throwaway sort of creatures for this effect. And then hell, a lot of times, a lot of our big reanimation creatures have ETBs and stuff we wouldn't mind reusing. So a lot of times we might just sack them to this and then bring back them again just to get their effect again. So Blood for Bones, great card for this deck, I think. Dread Return, a classic. 2 black for a sorcery. You return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And it also has Flashback, where you can cast it from your graveyard by sacking 3 creatures, and then you don't even have to pay any mana. This is one that we wouldn't mind throwing away early to Vohar, because 4 mana for a reanimate is like not the most efficient rate if we're just getting back 1 creature. But if we could do it for free by sacking 3 creatures, then that's definitely much more interesting. So yeah, Dread Return, just a classic good reanimation spell. One we actually don't mind discarding. Edgar's Awakening. This is an interesting one that people probably don't know exists, because it's from a garbage set, Crimson Vow. It's 3 black for a sorcery. You return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Not very powerful, but it also has another effect. When you discard it, you may pay a black mana. If you do, you return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. This is a nice little flexible card. You can buy back a creature that you need from discarding this, and then after you discard it later, you can flash it back with Vohar. Or you can just cast it for 5 and not feel great about it, but still, it's better than whatever you were going to pay for the card anyway. And then you can flash it back again for 5 later. So this card's got just enough flexibility, and it's a sorcery, so you can flash it back with Vohar, that I think it makes the cut here. It's worth the initial list at least. Incarnation Technique. This one's very powerful. 4 and a black for a sorcery. You can demonstrate it, which means when you cast it, you can copy it and let an opponent also get a copy of this spell. You mill 5 cards, then you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is 5 mana, mill 5 reanimated creature, and then you mill 5 reanimated creature. Very, very powerful card. Getting back, this is just a super efficient rate. It also gives you more options by milling you more stuff. So yeah, I think that this is one of the best reanimation spells, kind of in the format. It's super worth the 5 mana that you pay for this card, even though it's not hyper efficient like Reanimate itself. It just gives you a lot of material and it gives you more options. So don't sleep on Incarnation Technique. Definitely one we'll want to flashback with our commander too. I stuck Malakir Rebirth in this category. It's a 1 black mana instant. You choose a creature, you lose 2 life. Until end of turn, if that creature dies, it comes back into the battlefield tapped. The backside's just a land, a tap land. It's a modal DFC. I just wanted to tag it with something, and I kind of stuck it here. It loosely falls into the reanimating sort of category because it does bring creature back from your graveyard, but you already have to have the creature in play. So most of the time, we're just going to be playing this as a land in our deck. But it's a nice little instant speed interaction spell. If somebody wants to like kill one of our big creatures that we just reanimated, 1 black mana will allow us to keep it and maybe get another ETB or something. So I stuck it here, but it's not like a true reanimate spell. Persist, 1 and a black for a sorcery. Return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a -1 counter on it. There's a few things in the deck that are legendary creatures that we'd like to reanimate. But there's plenty of other creatures that we can reanimate with this spell that also... Well, there's not plenty. There's a few creatures that we can reanimate with this spell that also bring back a legendary creature with them. And it also has plenty of other good targets in the deck that it's definitely worth to include. 2 mana is a very, very efficient rate for this card. And the -1/- counter one is like not really a downside on this card. Reanimate, we already talked about it. It's the best version of this card. Rescue from the Underworld. This one's probably might not make the cut after a few tests, but I'm willing to give it a shot at least. It's 4 and a black for an instant. As an additional cost to cast Rescue from the Underworld, you sack a creature. You choose target creature in your graveyard. Return that card and the sacrifice card to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of your next upkeep, and then you exile this spell. This one's kind of iffy for me. You really, obviously, you want to cast this on the turn before you untap, so that way there's not a lot of room for things to go bad for you. But as it stands, it's a pretty all-in sort of reanimating spell. And then the creatures come in on your upkeep, so they still have summoning sickness and stuff. But there's plenty of cards that we wouldn't mind getting their ETBs again, so sacking them and bringing them back is not bad, as well as bringing something else in is not bad. So it's not the most efficient rate, and notably, we can only use Vohar's ability as a sorcery. So, we can't, like, instant speed this again after we've cast it once. So there's that as well. But once again, it falls under the instant and sorcery category of reanimating spells. So I'm willing to give it a shot, at least. Soul Exchange. This is an interesting one. It's a black sorcery. You can read through all the text here, but basically what it does is you exile a creature that you have, and then you get to reanimate a thing. So yeah, this is... there's not a lot of throwaway creatures that we have that we want to exile, but Vohar is obviously one that we can keep doing from our command zone. So exiling it's not the worst thing in the world. But yeah, really efficient reanimate spell here. 2 mana, brings the thing back. The only downside is you have to exile one of your creatures. So definitely is a downside, but it's worth it I think for this deck. Stitched Together. It's a black sorcery. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, but it has Threshold. You return it to the battlefield if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard. We can definitely pretty easily get 7 or more cards in our graveyard. We have a lot more ways to put cards in our graveyard besides just our commander. So this is a pretty reliable, very efficient reanimate spell we have. Victimize, another classic. 2 and a black for a sorcery. Choose target creature cards in your graveyard. Then you sacrifice a creature. If you do, return the chosen creatures to the battlefield tapped. So a couple interesting things about this card if you haven't played with Victimize or something. So Victimize, when you cast it, you have to choose your targets to reanimate. So you have to have 2 creatures in your graveyard, and you target them when you cast the spell. Now, that's when your opponents get the chance, their window to respond. If they exile one of the creatures, the rest of this effect still resolves. You'll still sack a creature and get the 1 back. If they exile both of them out of your graveyard, this spell just fizzles because it loses its target, so you don't have to sack your creature anymore. But notably, you don't have to sack the creature until the spell resolves, until you figured out if you're going to get your 2 things back or 1 thing back or what you're getting back, basically. So then you can make your choice of what you're sacking accordingly. Very weird card. Has some weird corner cases of how things work with it. But that's essentially how it works. It's a 3 mana reanimate spell with a few hoops to jump through, but it's 3 mana and it brings back 2 things. and you just have to sack the thing, so you put it in your graveyard. So if it's something you want to get back, you can get it back later. Very good card. You just have to be careful with it. If your opponents are holding up graveyard interaction removal, then obviously don't play this card into it. But yeah, if you don't have to have both of the cards still in the graveyard, this will still try to resolve as it can if one of them gets exiled after you've chosen targets, but you will still have to sack the creature as long as one of the cards is still in the graveyard that you chose. If both of them go away, the spell just fizzles and you don't have to sack anything. So that's how Victimize works. That's the long and the short. Okay, so those are the reanimating spells. Those are the important spells in our deck. So what are we reanimating with those spells? What are our sort of targets? We have 15 things that we sort of care about. If you look over here on the right side, the far right here with me. First up, we have Agent of Treachery. It's 5 and a blue for a human rogue. It's a 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, you gain control of target permanent. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 3 or more permanents you don't own, draw 3 cards. So, notably, when you can gain control of any permanent on the battlefield, anything your opponents have, you just get it, and you just get to keep it. Doesn't matter what happens to this thing. You get to keep it for as long as they exist in the game, basically. Or if they kill it, obviously, it goes to their graveyard. But yeah, this is a very good interaction spell. It gets rid of whatever's the problem for you, as well as gives you whatever the thing that's scariest is. So the last clause of having 3 or more things, that's pretty unlikely to happen. I really doubt our opponents are going to let us reanimate this 3 times, but if they do, then you're just going to go crazy and draw a bunch of cards, which is sweet. But yeah, just really good interaction creature here, as well as it gives us extra threats, allows us to grab things from our opponents that are scary. Next up, here's a pretty fun one. Ancient Brass Dragon. 5 black for a 7/6 Elder Dragon. It has flying. When it hits in a player, you roll a d20, and you get a reanimate total CMC equal to or less than the result that you get. So if you roll 20, you can pick up to 20 mana value of creatures in all graveyards and put them in a player under your control. If you roll 10, you do the same thing. You pick 10 mana value worth of creatures in graveyards, you put them on the play. This one's a pretty fun one. I think it's worth the include here, as it's a big creature to reanimate, as well as it keeps reanimating more stuff for you. Notably, you can do sort of some tricks with this. You can attack when you hit somebody. You can wait till you see if you hit them to get the trigger, and then before the trigger resolves, before you actually roll and see what the mana value is, then you can like activate your commander and discard another creature that you might want to get back with it or something. But once the result's chosen, then you have to make all your targets and everything. So you can't wait to see what your result is and then put things in your graveyard. You have to put them in beforehand. But at least you get to see if the creature hits before you pitch something that you think might get exiled from your graveyard or something. So this one's a fun one. I think it's a good enough reanimating target too. So I think it's worth a shot here. It's a little bit risky. Obviously, you have to attack with it before you get a whole lot of value out of it. But the value you get from it's pretty insane. So I like the card. I think it's worth a shot. Archon of Cruelty. 6 black for a 6/6 flyer. Whenever it enters or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, discards a card and loses 3 life, and then you draw a card and gain 3 life. This is a card that's been impressing me in Commander. It's obviously making waves in other formats, but it's a card that I've definitely been interested in Commander, but I haven't really found the right sort of Reanimator shell for this deck to find a home in, at least in my personal decks. But I think it's a great home here. It's not legendary, so all of our things that care about bringing back legendary creatures or non-legendary creatures can bring this back. And it just gives it a lot of value. Edicting your opponent and making them discard a card and lose some life is definitely a pretty hefty cost for them. So yeah, I like this card. I think it's good for this deck for sure. Grey Merchant of Asphodel, 3 black for a 2/4. When it enters, you drain each of your opponents equal to your devotion to black, and then you gain that much life. A classic card here. Most people, I'm sure all of you know what Gary does already. But yeah, just a really good reanimating target here. We're going to need to gain some life sometimes, and this will gain us pretty large swaths of life. Our devotion to black is never going to be like insane, I don't think. If it is, we're already winning pretty heavy because that means we have pretty big creatures already in play. Because I'm not running very many enchantments or random cards that sit around with pips on them and stuff. So most of the time this is going to be like 3 or 4, and then we gain 12 from it or whatever, which is a large chunk of life still. We're going to need that sometimes. So nice utility, sort of life drainy, sometimes maybe a win condition-y sort of card. Hullbreaker Horror. At this point, it's a classic, even though it just came out. 5 blue for a 7/8 with flash. It can't be countered. When you cast a spell, you get to either return a spell you don't control to its owner's hand or return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So really nice interaction spell, really good game closer, kind of locks everything down. If you leave up any sort of instant speed, anything, it makes your opponents have a really hard time casting anything meaningful. And if they don't cast anything meaningful, then you just bounce whatever's meaningful on the board. So yeah, Hullbreaker Horror, very powerful card, very good card for sure. Jin Gitaxis, Progress Tyrant, 5 blue for a 5/5. When you cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. This ability only triggers once each turn. Whenever an opponent casts an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, counter that spell. This ability only triggers once each turn. So really good reanimate target for us, as all of our reanimate spells that we cast all are instants and sorceries. So this just doubles up all of our reanimate spells, as well as any sort of interaction or card draw that we can cast on our opponent's turns. It's also very annoying for our opponents. It makes their removal kind of garbage, and it makes their mana ramp kind of annoying if they have like artifact mana ramp or they're an artifact heavy deck. So yeah, just a good interaction card while also being proactive for us and doubling up our reanimate spells and such. So cool card. Massacre Worm, 3 black for a 6/5. When it enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. And then whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. If you haven't been killed by a Massacre Worm, you definitely haven't played a tokens deck. This can definitely randomly kill people out of nowhere. If they're a go wide sort of tokens deck, you can just wipe their board and kill them. Honestly, not a bad win condition. This will end up killing people a lot of the times, or at least doing large chunks of life to them. It's nice to have board wipes on creatures that we already want to reanimate. So yeah, Massacre Worm, great one for the deck. Nezahal Primal Tithe, 5 blue for a 7/7. It can't be countered. You have no max hand size. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, you draw a card. And then you can discard 3 cards to flicker this. It exiles and comes back at the beginning of the next end step. Really annoying card to deal with as far as a big creature that sits around on the board and accrues a lot of card advantage for you. It also gives you a discard outlet if you have other big idiots that you want to discard, and maybe your commander's not sitting on the battlefield or something. So yeah, Nezahal seems like a solid include for the deck. We want some of our big idiots to just give us large swaths of cards, so that way we can keep our engine going. Sometimes we aren't always going to be able to win the game right away, just from reanimating one thing. Phyrexian Delver, 3 black for a 3/2 zombie. When it enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You lose life equal to that card's mana cost. So this card's great. It's a reanimate spell by itself, as well as if we reanimate it with one of our other actual reanimate spells, it gets to bring a buddy with it, so it can produce even more material on the board. It's also not a legendary, so if we use Persist on this, we can get back a legendary creature with our Persist in a way. So yeah, Phyrexian Delver, sweet card, classic card for Reanimator decks. It's hard to find creatures that also reanimate other creatures, especially immediately. There's one that I ended up putting in the sideboard that I'll go over and may end up in the deck anyway. But yeah, Phyrexian Delver, great card. Sepulchral Primordial, another classic. 5 black for a 5/4 Intimidate. When it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, you put up to 1 target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So you get to bring the best thing back from each other player's graveyard when you bring this back from your graveyard. It just produces a ton of material and value kind of all at once, as you'll get all the ETBs from all your opponent's good stuff that has died and all that stuff. So this is just a really good go wide value-y sort of card, all stapled kind of into one nice easy package. It's very rare that you're going to run into a situation where your opponents aren't playing any meaningful creatures for you to take from them. Even if it's just a Esper Sentinel that randomly died or something, that's still pretty decent for you to take, as it's going to draw you a card or two maybe. So yeah, Sepulchral Primordial, really good value, kind of all packed into one card. Shadowgrange Archfiend, this one's a sweet card. 6 and a black for an 8/4. It's a demon. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. You gain life equal to the greatest power among creatures sacrificed this way. And the important part of this card is it has Madness for 2 and a black, and you pay 8 life, which means if you discard this card, you can cast it for 2 and a black and 8 life, rather than paying its 7 mana cost. Yeah, it's a really good interaction card. It kills the biggest thing your opponents have, gains you some life back in the process. So if you need to, have an interaction on a big creature, you got that. And hell, most of the time you can just pay this for 3 mana, as we have a really reliable way to discard it in our command zone. as well as some other ways to discard it. So Shadow Grange Archfiend is going to be 3 mana almost always on the front side of it. And then randomly later when it dies, if we need this effect again, then we can grab it back. So awesome card for this deck for sure. Sire of Stagnation, 4 blue-black for a 5/7 with Devoid. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, that player exiles the top 2 cards of their library and you draw 2 cards. Really good card advantage sort of engine here. You could kind of put Consecrated Sphinx in the same sort of category. Realistically, you could put both in the deck, but I only just wanted to put this one for now because I just like this card. But yeah, really efficient. This is definitely a card that we can just reasonably cast. 6 mana is not a lot to ask for this card to draw us a bunch of cards. So yeah, Sire of Stagnation. Once again, another card that just draws us a bunch of cards in a nice small package. Sphinx of the Second Sun, 6 blue for a 6/6 flyer. At the beginning of your post-combat main phase, you get an additional beginning phase after this phase, which means you get untap, upkeep, draw before you get it past the turn. So this card allows you to get back all your mana that you spent for the turn, untaps all your things, so that way you get a hold up mana, and then you even get an extra card out of the deal. So really nice little package on this card. Good mana advantage, good card advantage. Yeah, sweet card. Toxrill the Corrosive. Oh boy, here we go. 5 black for a 7/7. At the beginning of each end step, you put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter on them. Whenever a creature you don't control dies with a slime counter on it, you create a 1/1 black slug creature token. Then it has one more line of text. Blue-black, sacrifice a slug, and you draw a card. This card just kind of takes over the game by itself. This is definitely one that doesn't need to sit out on the board very long before you just kind of win the game. It's just going to constantly kill everything on the board and give you tons of slugs that you can then sacrifice for cards. And it just locks down the board very, very well. This card's kind of a must deal with. It just takes over the game by itself, like I said. Notably, when this creature dies, the slime counters will stay on the creatures, but they won't have the -1 effect on them anymore. But if this comes back, they all immediately get the -1 based on their slime counters again, which we plan on doing in our deck, bringing it back. So, yeah. Notably, the last ability, Sacrifice a Slug to draw a card. You can sacrifice itself with this ability, because it doesn't say sacrifice another slug, and this is a slug. So if you're worried about your opponents maybe exiling it, I would recommend holding up 2 mana, so that way you can sacrifice this in response to keep it around for later to reanimate it again. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Once again, Toxrill, super powerful, very annoying card, locks down the board, takes over the game kind of by itself. Villas, Broker of Blood, 5 black for an 8/8 demon with flying. You pay a black and 2 life. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Whenever you lose life, draw that many cards. So this is another one of the best reanimation spells, reanimating targets we have in the deck. Best one of the things to reanimate. Another card that just kind of takes over the game by itself. You start paying a ton of life. If your opponents hit you, you lose life still, so you still draw the cards. Anything that you want to kill, you can generally kill with this ability, and just have a giant grip of cards. So yeah, Villas is just another card that just kind of takes over the game by itself. Gives you insane card advantage. The only thing that sucks about this card is the 8 mana cost, but turns out we aren't planning on paying that in this deck, so extremely powerful card. So those are all of our reanimating targets. I decided to go with just a nice even 15 to start, but we have a few more creatures. The last sort of section of creatures we have, where do I have them? We have a few more looters. So looters basically just do the same thing that our commander does. They just allow us to draw, discard. I wanted a little bit more redundancy, as just having our commander being the only thing that does that's probably not a good plan, as sometimes we might want to sack it, like I said, to cast a reanimate spell again or something. So I wanted a few extra lying around. So the first one I went with was Jace Vryn's Prodigy. It's 1 and a blue for a 0/2. You draw and discard, and then if you have 5 or more cards in your graveyard, you exile and then return it to the battlefield, transfer under your control as Jace Telepath Unbound, which is a 5 loyalty planeswalker. You +1 up to 1 target creature gets -2/-0 until end of turn. -3, you may cast an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn. If it would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile instead. Sound familiar? -9, you get an emblem with a bunch of garbage that nobody cares about. So yeah, this basically just does the same thing as our commander. You draw, discard, and then later you can flash back a reanimation spell. Sweet. All on a 2-mana body. It's really, really good redundancy here for sure. Next up, Ledger Shredder. Insanely powerful card. 1 and a blue for a Bird Advisor. It's a 1/3 flyer. Whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Ledger Shredder connives, which means you draw and then discard a card. And if you discard a non-land, which we usually will, this will get a +1 counter on it. This card will just generally loot more than once a turn, unlike our commander and Jace and the other ones here that we'll talk about. Because most of the time people cast 2 spells during a turn. It also includes use, so when you cast this and then another spell after it, it will immediately connive. Just an extremely good, efficient, powerful looter. Really annoying attacker and blocker really quickly. We have tons of things that we want to throw away to Ledger Shredder that are non-land, so this thing will grow very effectively. Yeah, Ledger Shredder, if you've played against it, played with it, you know it's insanely powerful. Anytime I'm playing blue and care about discarding cards, Ledger Shredder is usually in my deck now. Merfolk Looter, the classic. 1 and a blue for a 1/1. You tap to draw a card and discard a card. That's just good. That's just what we want to do. Thought Courier is the same card, basically. It's a 1 and a blue for a 1/1. You draw a card, then discard a card. This one's just a human wizard instead of our merfolk, but yep, we want this effect. 2 mana is definitely the right rate for it. But we do have one that's 3 mana, and it's Obsessive Stitcher. It's 1 blue and a black for a 0/3. You do the loot, so you tap to draw, discard a card. But you can also pay 2 blue and a black and sacrifice this to return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's a looter and a reanimation spell stapled onto one creature. Once again, it's not the most efficient. 3 mana for a looter is not ideal, but it's acceptable. And then 4 mana for a reanimation spell is, once again, not ideal, but acceptable. But having it all kind of on one nice little neat package here is just good. That's just good enough. And then I don't know where I put him, but the last creature we have in this section is just the classic. Oh, where is he? Where is he? There he is. Solemn Simulacrum. 4 mana for an artifact creature golem. It's 2/2. When it's battlefield, you search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then when it dies, you draw a card. Just a good value card. It's a good card to throw away and sack to one of our other reanimate spells, as it will die and then come back and then get us more lands and draw us cards. Just really good consistency. Good card to just kind of throw out there, throw away. So Solemn's great. Always good card. So yeah, that's our entire creature package. We also covered a lot of the instants and sorceries in the reanimate sort of section. But we have just a few more. We have, let me find it here. I put Solomon Ramp. Yes, I did. So we have a few draw spells and interaction spells to just kind of fill out the core of our deck to make sure it runs nice and smooth. We'll start with the draw section. So we have 2 of the basically the same card. We have Careful Study and Thought Scour. Both of them do very similar effect. Careful Study draws you 2 cards, and then you discard 2 cards. And then Thought Scour, and then I guess I'll throw... yeah, we'll just do that for now. And then Thought Scour, you mill 2 cards, then draw a card. So Careful Study, it does kind of put you down a card by making you draw 2 and discard 2. You don't kind of come out even on this exchange. But you do get to put away an extra card in the graveyard, which is generally better for us. While Thought Scour gives us just straight up puts 2 cards in our graveyard, and then we draw a card. So I think they're both worth the include here, as they are just good cards that will help with our consistency. Putting cards in our graveyard is what we want to do. Even though Careful Study does kind of technically bring us down a card, in a way it doesn't, because we put the cards in our graveyard where we want to get them anyway. So yeah, those are just really good 1 mana draw sort of spells. Deep Analysis. This one has actually card advantage, as it gives us more cards than we put into it. So for 3 and a blue, you just target player draws 2 cards, but it also splashback of 1 and a blue and pay 3 life to once again draw 2 cards. Obviously, the back side of this, the flashback side of this, is a very efficient rate. The 3 life is obviously fairly irrelevant for us, but this is a good card draw spell to throw away to Vohar, as it's something we want to put in our graveyard anyway to flashback. But if we're in dire straits, we can cast the front side of this and then cast the back side of this later. But just a really good, consistent card. We need some card draw here and there that actually gets us cards back. So Deep Analysis is here to do that. But that's also why a lot of our big creatures that we want to reanimate give us a lot of card advantage. Just that way we can, we don't mind going down cards on the front end to help get them in the graveyard, so that way we can recoup our cards later. Similarly, we have Frantic Search here. It's 2 and a blue for an instant. You draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, and then you untap 3 lands. So it's basically just a free Careful Study. Yeah, just a good card. Allows us to help put our things in our graveyard, find the things we want while being free. So yeah, great card. Really good consistency. If you care about discarding your graveyard, you're generally playing Frantic Search. Night's Whisper, a classic staple for me. 1 and a black for a sorcery. You just draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. That's just good. That just allows for consistency in your decks, so just good here. Similarly, we have Tainted Indulgence, which is a blue and a black. This one's an instant, however. You draw 2 cards, and then you discard a card unless you have 5 or more mana values among cards in your graveyard. Usually we will, but sometimes it's actually better for us to be able to discard a card. So just keep that in mind as you play the deck. But generally we have plenty of ways to discard in the deck as it stands with our commander and our other looters. So we may not always want to discard, but it's nice to have that extra flexibility here. So just keep that in mind. And then lastly, we have Windfall. Good reset button for us. 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. Almost all of our cards in our deck we don't mind putting in our graveyard, as they can all kind of come back with our commander or other things. So Windfall is just a good reset button for us. Generally, we'll gain cards from casting the spell. Most likely, one of our opponents will have more cards in their hand than us. I don't think we'll have too much of a problem kind of deploying the cards from our hand and getting our game plan going. I have a section for interaction sort of spells here. 8 might not be the right number, but I figured since a lot of our big creatures have a lot of interaction stapled to them, these are just like dedicated just interaction, that's all they do sort of cards. First up, a card that I keep coming back to that I've just keep being more and more impressed with. It's an Offer You Can't Refuse. It's a 1 blue mana instant, counter target creature spell. Its controller gets 2 treasure tokens. Just a no holds bars, just counter whatever's the problem. Most of the time, creatures are not the problem. Usually board wipes, game-ending artifacts, stuff like that. Aetherflux Reservoirs, Bulls of the Citadels, all those insanely powerful cards. Smothering Tides, Ristic Studies, you name it. Turns out when you counter the thing that's really scary, just giving them 2 treasure tokens doesn't really matter a whole lot, because they don't get their thing, and all they get is just 2 mana back out of the probably 6+ mana that they spent on the thing that they actually wanted. So yeah, an Offer You Can't Refuse, just a very powerful, good card for sure. I generally just like playing this over Swan Song nowadays, to be honest. This catches more things, and giving them 2 treasures is not much more of an upside than giving them a 2/2 bird. So been always impressed with this card since it came out. Arcane Denial, 1 and a blue for an instant. Counter target spell. Its controller may draw 2 cards at the beginning of the next upkeep. You draw a card at the beginning of the next upkeep. You have to draw a card, and then they may. So the important part about Arcane Denial is it's easy to cast. It's 1 and a blue, so it's 2 mana for a counter spell. Just a no holds bars counter spell, counter whatever you need to. Sure, your opponent gets an extra card out of the deal, but what's important is you get your card back, so you don't go down a card for interacting. So Arcane Denial, super stellar counter spell. Usually the first one I grab for counter spells in my decks, is it's always real easy to cast, always very efficient, and you don't go down a card. So love Arcane Denial. Counter spell, the classic. It counters a spell. It's 2 mana. It's good. We need interaction. We want a few counter spells. This is just a good, solid staple one. Cyclonic Rift, you know what it does. We're a blue deck. We need board wipes and interaction. It's one of the best ones in the format, no doubt. Infernal Grasp, 1 and a black for an instant. Destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. Love this card. Always initially throw it in my black decks, as it's just a 2 mana, kill whatever's the problem. A lot of the black 2 mana removal spells have conditions. The creature can't have counters on them. Non-black, non-artifact, all that sort of stuff. This is just kill whatever's the problem. Sure, you lose 2 life, unlike some of the other removal spells, but that's a trade I'll take, just to kill whatever's the problem. So, love Infernal Grasp. Reality Shift, 1 and a blue for an instant. Exile target creature. Its controller manifests the top card of their library. So what's important here is that, similar to Infernal Grasp, it's a 2 mana removal spell that gets rid of whatever's the problem, but this one gets whatever's the problem permanently. Sure, it actually leaves them with a little something, a 2/2, and they may be able to manifest it face up, but very unlikely that they will, or if it's worth manifesting up. So, that being said, Reality Shift, super great card. Similarly, a card I like even better is Resculpt. So it does the same thing, except you can exile an artifact or creature, and then they get a 4/4 instead. So there's no opportunity for them to actually get a creature that matters, that they can flip up, they get some ability. They just get some vanilla 4/4 that doesn't really matter. 4/4 is not big enough to matter with no abilities. And the extra flexibility of being able to hit artifacts is huge on this card. Any sort of extra card type that I can hit with my removal spells, I will happily take. Resculpt has been just an absolute all-star for me. Always throw in my blue decks nowadays to get started. And probably one of, if not the best creature board wipes in the format, Toxic Deluge. 2 and a black, sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you pay X life. And then all creatures get -X till end of turn. So it's a really flexible board wipe. We're usually going to have the biggest creatures as we cheat them out and get them out earlier than most people. And most other opponents are actually going to pay mana for their creatures. So it's a nice flexible board wipe. But if we need to kill absolutely everything, -X, we'll get whatever's the problem. Hexproof, indestructible, doesn't matter. Toxic Deluge gets rid of it. And only at the cost of 3 mana and some life. So we love Toxic Deluge. So yeah, that's kind of the just bread and butter sort of glue cards for the deck, cards that you just need for your deck to work, the card draw and interaction side of things. We have a nice little suite of mana ramp here. So we had the Solemn that we talked about earlier, the Solemn Simulacrum. Where is he? There he is, right here. Then we have 11 mana rocks in the deck and a pair of Lightning Greaves. Lightning Greaves I threw in the deck because it seemed like a really nice piece for the deck. Allows us to get our looters going the turn that we put them into play so we don't have to wait. Plus the creatures that we reanimate, all of our reanimation spells don't give haste or anything. So being able to slap these on and get them going right away, because a few of them have attack triggers and stuff. So Lightning Greaves seems like a nice little piece for our deck. Nice little haste enabler. But the other 11 artifacts we have here are all just mana rocks, just in case we actually have to cast our reanimation spells and just to help get us consistently moving through the game. So we have just the normal suite: Arcane Signet, Dimir Signet, Everflowing Chalice, Felwar Stone, Mind Stone, Patriarch's Seal. I'll read this one because it's a new one. It's a 3 mana artifact. It taps to add 1 mana of any color, and you can pay 1 tap and untap target legendary creature you control. I'm willing to give this one a shot. This one may end up getting cut for like a, I don't know, just a Liquid Metal Torque or whatever. It's just another random 2 mana rock. But I like the nice flexibility of being able to untap our commander or something else to get some extra value and extra loot or something. So I'm willing to try this one out at least. Prismatic Lens, Soul Ring, Talisman of Dominance, Thran Dynamo, and Wayfarer's Bauble. All normal sort of mana rocks you'd see in just about any 2-color deck that isn't green. And then I think that basically covers all of the main deck. Let me just look through my tags again here real quick just to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh yeah, we have a few tutors in the deck. All stuff that you would expect to see. I guess I'll run through them real quick. Buried Alive, 2 and a black for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 3 creature cards. You put them into your graveyard and then shuffle your library. Obviously, we have plenty of creatures we want to put into our graveyard, and sometimes we want to put specific ones, whether we need a board wipe like Toxrill, or we need a ton of card advantage with like Sire of Stagnation or whatever. Or maybe we want to double up on our, like sort of instants and sorceries, our reanimation spells, so we get Jin Cataxius. So there's a lot of options here for Buried Alive. Demonic Tutor, it's a tutor, you know what it does. Entomb, great for our deck, puts the thing where we want to put it in our graveyard at instant speed. Vampiric Tutor, it's a tutor, it's really good. So yeah, we'll move into lands now, and then we'll get into the sideboard. Lands is basically what you'd expect. Ancient Tomb, Bajuka Bog, Cephalic Colosseum. I'll read this one since it's not one that's seen too often nowadays. It taps for a blue mana and it deals 1 damage to you. If you have 7 cards in your graveyard, which means you have Threshold, you can pay blue, tap, and sacrifice this to draw 3 cards, then discard 3 cards. Very effective way of looting on a land. Pinging us in the meantime every once in a while is not very much of a downside. It comes in untapped, produces colored mana. Just a really good utility land. The Pathway, Command Tower, Bounce Land, Buddy Land. Do really like the Secret Lair art, by the way. It looks pretty cool in person, too. Exotic Orchard, Gaia Reach Sanitarium. You know, I love this card. It taps for a colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap. Each player just draws a card, then discards a card. Gives us a good way to loot on a land. Our opponent's going to do it too, but we definitely can take more advantage of it than them, I believe. Minamo's School at Water's Edge, taps for a blue, or you can pay a blue and tap to untap a legendary permanent. So this will untap our commander if we need to, one of our other big idiots, or maybe this Nykthos Shrine to Nyx if we have a lot of devotion to a color. Otawara, good interaction on a land. I put just Polluted Delta as fetch lands in this deck. If you have more blue and or black fetch lands, put them in the deck. But I just put Polluted Delta to just kind of represent fetch lands in general. But just put the ones that you have in. Fetch lands are very powerful and very good, so run them. Port of Carfell, cool land. Enters the battlefield tapped, produces a blue mana. You can pay 3 blue, black, black, and sacrifice it to mill 4 cards. Then you reanimate a creature into play tapped. Cool little land here. Nice to have a little redundancy on a land, even though it's very inefficient. Sometimes we might just run out of things to do, and this is a nice land to make sure we don't run out of things to do. Shipwreck Marsh, some basics, Sunken Hollow, Sunken Runes, Tainted Isle, Takanuma, Underground River, Underground Sea, Urborg, Watery Grave. Basically the suite of fixing lands that you'd expect, and then a handful of utility lands. Okay, so last thing that I wanted to cover was Sideboard. So Sideboard, these are cards that I decided to cut because I wanted to go with a more reliable, specific direction to make sure the deck idea works. That's usually kind of what I like to do on initial deck builds, is come up with a solid idea to at least get the deck off the ground. As you probably heard me mention, there's a few cards in the deck that I may not be keen on, but I wanted to try at least. And that's where some of these cards are probably going to end up filling in, is for those cards. So part of what the sideboard is over here is it's a lot of cards that are either more versions of cards that are in the deck that I might want more of, or they're like a little bit different direction with the deck I wanted to go. There's a handful of cards in the sideboard here that lean a little bit more heavy into the looting side of things, like churning through your deck a lot more and drawing and discarding a lot more. But if you run into that strategy, you probably have to run less reanimation sort of targets, which I like the nice little sort of utility package of the options that I have. We have a little bit of everything. We have board control, we have card draw, we have life gain, we have, whatever we need sort of options, and we have ways to tutor them and put them in our graveyard reliably. So I like the kind of toolboxy sort of version of the deck that I built initially. But if you just want to be able to churn through your deck more reliably, that's kind of where a lot of the sideboard stuff is going to come in. So first up, we have Animate Dead. It's just basically 2 mana to reanimate a creature from your graveyard, and then the aura attaches to the creature you reanimate. Very, very efficient reanimate spell. Reanimates from any graveyard, but it's not an instant or sorcery, so our commander doesn't care about it. So this and Dance of the Dead, which is very similar card. It's 2 mana, reanimates a creature, and then it comes into play tapped, and then you can pay 2 on your untap step if you wanted to untap it. But yeah, basically the same card for all intents and purposes. They're 2 mana to reanimate a creature with a very small downside. Yeah, there's probably a world where I put these back into the deck and cut some iffy cards from the main deck because I just want more reanimation spells. But I want to at least try the number I have first and see if that's where I feel good about or not. Bonded Fetch. This is another looter. It's 2 and a blue for a 0/2 Defender Haste. And you draw a card and then discard a card. So even though this one's 3 mana, it at least has haste, which is really nice. So you can loot immediately with this one. Nice little looter here for sure. We would never care about attacking with any of the other looters as it is, so defender doesn't matter on this card, obviously. Call to the Nether Void. It's 1 black mana for a sorcery. You return a black creature from your graveyard to your hand, but it has madness for no mana. So if you discard it, you get to cast it for free and bring back a black creature to your hand. Good value on this card. Most of the creatures in our graveyard, we just want to stay in our graveyard, however. But there's a version of this deck, if you, like I said, lean a lot more into the looting and churning through your deck, then this could probably find a home in that deck. Circular Logic, 2 and a blue for an instant. You counterspell unless that player pays 1 for each card in your graveyard, and it also has a madness for just a blue. almost always we want to use our discard outlet to pitch our giant idiots. So this card would probably feel a little awkward and at odds with what we're trying to do. But there's definitely a world where this might fit in over like an offer you can't refuse or counter spell or something like that. But yeah, it's this is definitely another one of the in the line for Called Another Void of the churning through your deck version. Consider in that version of the deck as well, it's 1 blue mana. You look at the top card of your library, you can put it in your graveyard if you want to, and then you draw a card. Containment Construct also falls into that category. When you discard a card, you can exile it from your graveyard. If you do, you can play that card this turn. The cards we want to discard, we don't want to actually cast. We want to cheat them into play. So, but there's still some situations where this could be good and just throwing it in the deck as it stands. But not as enough situations for me, at least. Damnation, it's another board wipe. If we need another board wipe, this is probably the first one I'll go to. Dark Withering, another one for the lot more discarding sort of style of deck. You could madness it for 1 black to kill a creature. This card we're never flashing back from our graveyard. 6 mana is just way too much. Dig Through Time, another one for that sort of deck. Fact or Fiction, another one for that sort of deck. Cataract of Leviathan is one that I kind of reluctantly cut. It's 6 blue for a 5/5, and when it enters the battlefield, you return all other non-land permanents to their owner's hands. And it also has Unearth for 6 and a blue. So this would be another decent creature to have as a board wipe, kind of on a stick to bring back. But it's just annoying that it resets all of our things too. So all of our leaders we have to replay, and then they have Summoning Sickness and stuff. So I ended up cutting it. It seemed a little awkward for our deck, but I do really like it as it has Reanimation built in for it. And it's, resets everybody all at once. So there's some things I like about this card, but I think it's just a little awkward for what we want to do. Living Death, once again, another card that fits into the churning through your deck a lot more. This is one of the main payoffs for that version of the deck for sure. So yeah, I don't feel like it doesn't fit well in the version that I have, as, we'll reanimate a handful of things here and there. And we're never going to have like 6 big creatures in our graveyard, I don't think, because we're not actively milling or drawing and discarding a ton. We're just doing it enough to kind of get our engine going and make sure we have a reliable target for our reanimation spells and our reanimation spells. So, Oscar Rubbish Reclaimer, another good payoff for the heavy discard version of this deck, as it allows you to play cards that you discard, and this card gets cheaper if you do. Soul Shatter, just a good interaction spell. If I find that I want another creature removal spell, then this is a good one that you can also flash back with your commander. Swan Song, like I said, if I wanted another interaction spell first, I'd probably go to Circular Logic and then this one. So, yeah, Swan Song, I just like an offer you can't refuse more nowadays. The Celestus, this is a cool one. This one I might replace Patriarch's Seal with. It's a 3 mana legendary artifact. If it's neither day nor night, it becomes day when this enters. It taps for 1 mana of any color, so it's a 3 mana rock. You can pay 3 mana to switch it from day to night or night to day. And then whenever it becomes day to night or night to day, you get to gain 1 life, and then you get a loot. You get a draw and discard. So it's a cool mana rock that will allow us to loot. We can force it to loot, or just sometimes it will happen naturally, which is pretty sweet. So yeah, I like the Celestus, one that I might end up replacing Patriarch's Seal. Patriarch's Seal just seems a little bit more consistent for allowing the looting, as it's rarely ever going to switch to night in Commander. People just are almost always doing stuff. They have a commander sitting in their command zone they can always cast, because if it's not on the battlefield, it's probably better if it was. So yeah, Celestus, not often to flip unless you force it. So when I think of it that way, Patriarch's Seal in a way is just more efficient at doing that thing. So Treasure Cruise, just like Dig Through Time, goes into the heavy draw discard sort of deck. Unearth, it's a reanimation spell for really cheap that we can cycle, but it only reanimates small things. The things that we want to reanimate are big things. Not very many small things lying around that we want to reanimate. The only things there are like looters, but we don't really care about bringing back looters. We have one in our command zone we can bring back. Unmarked Grave, this one just barely didn't make the cut for me. It's 1 and a black for a sorcerer. You search library for a non-legendary card, and you put it into your graveyard, then shuffle. I just didn't find that there was enough. The non-legendary cards that we want to get are like kind of iffy. Sure, we could get Dread Return as a reanimation spell to put in our graveyard, but we're not often going to have 3 creatures lying around that we just want to throw away, so that kind of feels a little awkward. And then also it's like the real good, like super insane board control-y, like draw power engines like Toxrill and Villas, these sort of cards, they're both legendary. I mean, sure, like I said, we have some, a lot of our creatures are not legendary that we want to reanimate, but the really powerful ones are. So yeah, this one was just like a little iffy for me, so I ended up deciding to cut it. But there's a world where you can put it in the deck, but I found that I have 4 tutors in the deck, and I feel like that's enough. I don't really want to reanimate. I don't really want to put a ton more in. If anything, I'd probably put like a Corpse Connoisseur or something in the deck because it's a creature that that entombs things. So, which is what we want. Wake the Dead. This card's really cool. It's X black black for an instant. Cast Wake the Dead only during combat on an opponent's turn. You return X creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then you sacrifice those creatures at the beginning of the next end step. So you get to flash in a bunch of creatures to reanimate all at once. You get all their ETBs, all their effects, their effective blockers for that turn, and then you sacrifice them all. You get all their death triggers and stuff. So all of that is sweet and all. The really cool card, really interesting. However, you can only do it on combat on your opponent's turn, and Vohar will only let you do its ability as a sorcery, so you can never flash this back with its ability, which is really unfortunate. That being said, this card's just really cool and quite powerful, I think, and it doesn't really see play anywhere, so just keep this card in mind if you're building a Reanimate deck, but this doesn't seem like the home for it. But, you know, cool card either way. Probably a card that you could consider including in the Living Death version of this deck once again. Wonder, 3 and a blue for an Incarnation. It's a 2/2 flyer, and then as long as it's in your graveyard and you control an island, creatures you control have flying. Most of our creatures that we reanimate already have flying, and then giving flying to the few things that doesn't really feel that relevant to me. So yeah, I ended up cutting it because it doesn't really offer much else outside of that, outside of like some niche scenarios where it might be kind of good. So for that reason, it ended up getting the cut. And the card that I really don't want to cut the most from this deck, a card that's been overperforming ever since it came out, is Young Necromancer. 4 and a black for a 2/3 human warlock. When it enters the battlefield, you exile 2 cards from your graveyard, any 2 cards. When you do, you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Like Phyrexian Delver, not many creatures bring back creatures right away to the battlefield. We have like Doom Necromancer and Apprentice Necromancer, which they have to tap to do this effect, so you don't get them right away. They have to sit there for a turn. Your opponents have to let it go all the way around the table just on some stupid 2/2 or 1/1 and let it live, and then you can get your thing back. It's pretty slow and clunky and awkward. While this, it's just kind of out of nowhere. It comes in, reanimates a thing, just straight up. And you can exile any 2 cards from your graveyard, whether they're instant sorceries, lands, whatever. You don't have to eat creatures with this ability, so you can eat whatever else you have lying around that you don't plan on ever bringing back. So yeah, just a very effective card. Good rate, good creature to bring back another creature. A lot of good things going for this card, but I just needed some cuts, and this is one of the few last cuts that I decided to make. I felt like everything else that I had in the deck I wanted to try running first, because I know this card's good. Every time I play it, I feel good playing it, so I don't need to be sold on this card for it to be in the deck, but some of these other cards that I have in the deck, you can tell that I want to be sold on and try them out first to see if they're worth running. So yeah, that being said, Young Necromancer probably makes the deck when it comes down to it. But, you know, I wanted to cut it for now at least and put forth this deck to try it out. Okay, I got a suggestion. The last thing I'm going to do, I don't normally do this, but last thing I'm going to do is show you a few test hands and just give you a couple initial thoughts I have, what sort of things you would want to look for in your opening hand. It's kind of a suggestion I had from a buddy of mine, a viewer of mine. So, yeah, we'll go ahead and look at a few hands here, and I'll give you some suggestions, at least as far as what I think and play patterns I would expect to do. So this first hand looks like a pretty solid keeper to me. We got 3 lands. We have some discard outlets. We have some reanimation spells, a creature we're going to reanimate. It seems like we have everything we want. No ramp here, but that's fine. We can get our game plan going with what we just have going here. I would say we'd probably want to run out our commander first before running out this leather shredder. We'll draw a few cards here as well. So we got a demonic tutor here that we draw pretty early. So what I would probably recommend doing is, so turn 1, you play your land pass. Turn 2, you play your commander, because you want to get the summoning sickness sort of online. Ledger Shredder will do his thing immediately, basically, when he comes in. Turn after, play a land, play your Ledger Shredder. Then the turn after, you can play like Soul Ring into, well, I mean, you probably want to like Demonic Tutor is what I'm thinking. We Demonic Tutor for Soul Ring here. I should elaborate on that. So yeah, Demonic Tutor into Soul Ring. So yeah, then we kind of get more mana going, and then we're looking at Blood for Bones, Stitched Together, that sort of stuff. So yeah, it looks like this is a pretty good hand. I'm pretty happy with this hand. In this hand, we'd also probably end up pitching the Takanuma with its channel ability, as we have plenty of mana, it looks like, coming in, so we don't really need that. But there's a world where you don't get like Soul Ring with this Demonic Tutor or something. But early on with this hand, I'm mostly worried about being short on mana. But after we kind of get going here, it looks like we can stabilize as far as mana. We won't have to really rely on our, reanimation spells as much. This hand is basically the same hand. This hand looks fine. We don't have black mana here, which is a little awkward, but we have a Patriarch Seal, some interaction and stuff. It's not bad. And we would get bailed out with the Felwar Stone here anyway. So turn 2, we would play the Felwar Stone. Turn 3, probably play Patriarch Seal into Commander. And then we can really get things going. Then we'll start Unburial Righting and casting Edgar's Awakening and leaving up Arcane Denial. So yeah, we have some things going on here in this hand. And we even end up drawing a Reanimate target too. We'll just do this as kind of our last hand, and we'll end it right here at the hour mark. This one is passable. It's a little iffy. I would probably keep this one, though, as we have Buried Alive and a couple Reanimate spells. And then we have some filtering here with Careful Study in our commander. So turn 1, I would probably just go ahead and run out the Careful Study. We would draw 2, this Entomb and this Prismatic Lens. And then we'd probably end up discarding this Looter, as it's kind of redundant. And since we don't have a creature to throw away to reanimate, we'd probably just end up throwing away. I'm just thinking this Prismatic Lens probably. Draw for the next turn, play land, cast Commander, next turn, draw. We drew another Reanimate spell. So this turn we'd probably go ahead and run out the Buried Alive. Actually, I'd probably wait one more turn just so that we'll probably hold up Entomb at instant speed. Then we untap, and we can Buried Alive or Reanimate plus Persist. A lot of options here. Plus, with Entomb, we can get whatever we want, so we can go ahead and grab like something insanely powerful, like a Toxrill or Villas, and start taking over. But that might be a little too early for that sort of effect. It may be best to grab a Sphinx of the Second Sun, or like a Sire of Stagnation or something, as we can get our card advantage engine going a little bit more reliably there. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a few ideas of what to look for as far as starting hands and play patterns and stuff. Generally, I'd recommend trying to get run Vohar out on turn 2 most of the time, unless you have a mana rock to play on turn 2, as getting Vohar online allows you to start getting your looting going, because Summoning Sickness is an important hurdle to jump for this card. But even on turn 2, a lot of times over playing a mana rock, I'd probably recommend playing Vohar. As turn 3, you can probably play a mana rock into another 2-drop or something relevant. So yeah, it's just important to get your looters off their Summoning Sickness and get their looting going, because that's kind of the main engine to our deck and such. So that's Vodalian Desecrator. So you get to hear me butcher it one more time. That's my Reanimator deck, Dominaria Reanimator around Vohar. Like I said, super sweet card. Gives us the draw and discard outlet to help get us to our Reanimate spells and discard the things that we want to reanimate, while also giving us a nice little upside of being able to flash back our Reanimate spells with its second ability sometimes. So yeah, super sweet deck. Like I said, I think this deck can easily hit the ground running. I think it's definitely got a good core to this deck. Pretty tried and true strategy here. So not the most groundbreaking deck that we've done on this series, but nice to be a little bit more grounded and kind of have a more reliable deck for those that want to try it out. So yeah, I've been Blake. Another episode of Brewsday Episode 3. Hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for more. I have the whole rest of like I said, I have the Dominaria set review of all the commanders out, all 75 of them. Check out that video if you want to see what I think about the other commanders. I'm going to do a few more videos on commanders that I did in that set review. So stay posted for that. Stay posted for Brewsday. And stay posted for the rest of the set review, which I'll have coming out later this week. It's going to be a best of the rest. I'm going to review all the other cards in the set. I'm going to basically normally I review every rare and mythic, and then any other notable commons and uncommons, I think. But there's a lot of filler rares in this set, so I'm going to skip over a lot of that stuff and just review just cards that I think are relevant for the format, regardless of rarity. That'll still be a plenty large enough list from this set. I think there's plenty of play in this set. So, but yeah, that's the video. just over an hour. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you spending your time with me. Take care of yourselves. Loves y'all. Do all the algorithm stuff, like, comment, sub for me if you don't mind. So take care of yourselves.